Hello, my name is Audrey Lamb. I'm a commercial forestry account manager based in Olympia, Washington of the Pacific Northwest. It is my pleasure today to welcome you to our webinar focused on using field apps to increase productivity of key forestry workflows. This webinar is being recorded and will be posted in the next few days. As a participant, you will receive a link and a follow-up email to the recording. We would like to encourage you to enter questions in the GoToWebinar questions dialog box as we go along during the presentation. We will answer as many of the questions as time permits towards the end of the session. If we don't get to your question, we will follow up with you after the webinar. I've introduced myself already. Again, my name is Audrey Lamb. I'm joined by my Esri colleague, Scott Newlis. Scott is the solution engineer on our Esri Natural Resources team, speaking to us from Houston, Texas. I'm very excited to let you know that we have a special guest who's joining us today. Sarah Billig is the Director of Stewardship for Humboldt and Mendocino Redwood companies. Sarah and I share an appreciation for how important a strong environmental stewardship program is for business continuity. She's done an exceptional job developing and launching a state-of-the-art field data collection model for environmental compliance that's driving mobile adoption throughout Humboldt and Mendocino Redwood companies. We are so excited to have her here today. A quick review of the agenda before we get started. I'll be making some introductory comments and then walk through the various ArcGIS field apps. Then I'll turn things over to Sarah Billig to discuss how her team has transitioned their legacy GIS system to a modern web-based approach that uses field apps for a key environmental compliance workflow. Then Scott Newlis will follow up with demonstrations of how forestry companies can use field apps for workflows such as road maintenance, environmental compliance, and managing timber harvest units. And then we'll address any questions for as long as time permits. I'd like to start with a few comments on who we are and what we do. We are a software company focused on mapping technology called ArcGIS. We've been in business for over 50 years and continue to lead the world in geospatial technology. Esri was founded on natural resources and specifically forestry. Many of you have been with us since the beginning. At Esri, we are a research-driven company spending more than 25% of our annual revenue on research and development. We do so that we can continue to deliver innovative technology that harnesses the power of applied geography. We continue to modernize and grow our platform to keep pace with changes in technology and meet the needs of our users. We are a global company with more than 80 offices around the world and employ people from more than 65 different countries. Our #1 goal is to support you with your needs for the best spatial technology. We are giving you the power to integrate all types of data with maps so you can visualize, analyze, and solve your spatial needs. Now I'd like to focus on how field apps help increase field productivity for forestry companies. Field data collection is essential for foresters. Challenges with remote locations, weather conditions, and significant post-processing work have made it difficult and time-consuming to get field data onto a centralized GIS system. ArcGIS field apps bring your GIS data into the field, providing an end-to-end solution that integrates with your GIS system. Field users view and collect information in one common platform. Data collection is simple, eliminates paper forms, and decreases errors. Field apps operate seamlessly in disconnected and connected environments. This common operating platform provides operational visibility in a centralized location in real time or near real time. Most of you know ArcGIS as desktop software. ArcGIS Desktop is the most common way forestry companies have traditionally used Esri software. But take a look at the entire platform. Desktop is just a very small part of it. ArcGIS can be used to configure web maps and apps with specific views for different personas in your organization, such as viewing inventory on a web map a forest asset dashboard, or even a stakeholder engagement story map. If you have a desktop license, you already have access to all of these things. Today, we're going to focus on the field mobility part of the forest management platform. Here we see some typical organizational tasks associated with field data collection. We have a whole suite of applications that organizations can use for efficient, accurate, and optimized data collection. These applications can be used in both connected and disconnected environments. These products can be used individually as well as in conjunction with each other and have different functionalities for each phase of field data collection. Today, we're going to focus on the plan, capture, and monitor phases of common forestry field workflows. Here are some examples of how forestry companies are using field apps for common workflows. Field apps are being used for herbicide application to manage spraying activities in the field and track the status of projects in the office. Projected costs are compared to actual costs per acre in a dashboard. Organizations are using field apps for road maintenance workflows to understand where they're spending their money and track how effective their maintenance operations are. Timber cruising, we all know about this workflow. Did you know that you can do it with Esri apps? Forestry companies are seeing huge efficiencies by using field apps for their environmental compliance workflows. We're going to hear more about that from Sarah today. These are all examples of how some of our customers are using Esri's out-of-the-box software with no customization needed. We're here to work with you to help you configure these apps and get your crews comfortable using field apps. At this point, I'd like to introduce Sarah Billig. Sarah is the Director of Stewardship for Humboldt and Mendocino Redwood companies. We are so thrilled to have her with us. Humboldt Redwood has been with Esri since the very beginning. They are Esri's 123rd customer ever. Humboldt and Mendocino Redwood companies own and manage over 500,000 acres of redwood and Douglas fir forests in Northern California. They manage highly productive forest lands with a high degree of environmental stewardship. Environmental compliance is key to their business continuity. Sarah has been leading a journey to move Humboldt from a legacy GIS system to a modern web-based GIS with integrated field data collection. The first area she focused on was environmental stewardship, since it's critical to business operations. Her team has built streamlined workflows that make field data collection much more efficient and provide operational visibility over their stewardship program. This has been a huge success for the company, and Humboldt and Mendocino Redwood companies are currently adopting similar workflows in other areas of the business. Here's Sarah.
Good morning. Thanks for having me. Appreciate the invite from Esri, and I appreciate everyone showing up this morning. Thanks for having me. As Audrey mentioned, my name is Sarah Billig. I'm the Director of Stewardship for Mendocino and Humboldt Redwood companies. And just a little bit about our business. Both businesses were formed with the idea that we could demonstrate it's possible to manage these highly productive redwood forest lands with a high degree of environmental stewardship and to be a successful business at the same time. And a big part of being able to do that is being able to provide information in a timely fashion. Several years ago, my boss came to me and said, hey, we have basically Mendocino and Humboldt Redwood companies. They're managed the same, but we have two different data systems for those two businesses, and that needs to change. The data is siloed with subject matter experts, and it's not easily available to me. I have to call person X and get their database in order to be able to grab that data. So we started on a journey to try and bring our two businesses into one transparent, centralized data set in terms of all the geospatial information we manage. And we decided to start with our spotted owl, northern spotted owl compliance, for two reasons. One, we had two data systems that were slowly beginning to crumble as they were built from many, many years ago, and we were trying to hold them together, various systems with literally duct tape. And two, this is the main thing that causes difficulties in our operations. We have to first make sure we can find spotted owls. and that can hold up when we can start our operations. And then we have to protect them, which can cause us to lose areas in our harvest plans. So we really need to have that information readily available. So we started with that. We had 2 different processes at the 2 different businesses, independently managed. And so we tried to make this as complex as possible for our starting place. So I'm calling this talk The Team in the Arena, because this is a very complex workflow. We're starting from data collection and gathering and going all the way through to providing reports and information to regulators, to executives, and to harvest operations managers. And we want to be able to have it in the moment. And I'm referencing one of my favorite speeches from Teddy Roosevelt, which is about the man in the arena. I think in order to do these projects, you have to prepare yourself when they're very complex workflows. To one, you have to have a great team, which I do, thankfully, of very good technical specialists. And 2, you have to be ready to jump into the arena and be a bit bold about what you're about to tackle and be ready to, as it were, take some punches and get back up. So why are you getting the stewardship director instead of a GIS analyst or one of my technical members? I like this joke because it's pretty much been something I've heard throughout my career. I guess I'm not qualified. And I have a lot of history with endangered species. That's where I started my career with this business, was working with northern spotted owls. So I understand the data collection. I understand the needs of the subject matter experts. I since transitioned into being our director of stewardship for both these businesses. So I also understand the needs from our regulators as well as from our executives in the business and our forest managers. I'm able to be a bridge between those folks to provide the needs of both. And oftentimes when you have a technical team, I think it's difficult for everyone to talk to each other between the GIS analysts and the subject matter experts. And that really has become my function over time. The keys to success for this are, I mentioned it already, is really just putting your head down, having a great team, and not giving up until you get to the end point. So today we'll be talking about this critter here on the left. This is the northern spotted owl, and here we're seeing a picture of actual data being collected in the woods, where we get to capture those owls and put pretty little bracelets on them to find out where they are and what they're doing. And on the far right, you'll see some of what we're building and getting to, and I'll get to during this talk about how we've built this workflow from the ground up in order to be able to provide the navigational tools for our field data collectors, the tools to collect that data seamlessly in an offline mode, bring it back into a centralized authoritative database that can be queried by our subject matter experts and QC'd by our subject matter experts, and then provided in various report forms to our harvest managers, our executives, and our regulators. And we have finally, I think, managed to transition from developing this as a project and getting it up and running to standing it up fully with very few tweaks left to be done to make it fully functional. So what we started with here, obviously, was this endangered species compliance. We know we need to have this data in hand and readily available to get our timber harvest plans approved and to be able to operate. And as I mentioned earlier, we have 2 separate independently built data systems. One at Humboldt Redwood Company was built almost 20 years ago. It was a Rolls-Royce at the time, but it's slowly falling apart. And the second, built more recently for Mendocino Redwood Company, did utilize mobile data collection with Palm Pilots that had to be brought in and plugged into laptops in order to sync that data with the database. An innumerable amount of technical problems with that, not to mention the fact that Palm Pilot technology was not really being supported anymore. So we knew we needed to make a change there. And we have managers, executives, and regulators who need this up-to-date information. Everybody has phones now. They want to be able to access this information on demand when they need it, when they need to answer a question. So early on, we knew we needed to bring these 2 disparate systems together. We had an objective to do that, and we knew we needed to. The first thing we did was look at existing platforms. Could we use one of those platforms to build this system? And as we started to look through those, we realized that they were very much black boxes and didn't allow a lot of flexibility in how you built the system, and realized that that was not going to work for us. Then we wondered whether we could do it on our own. Well, we have a team of myself and 3 other GIS analysts. We realized we needed some help. About that time, our Esri account manager called up and said, hey, we have this enterprise agreement system that might work for you. It might be a good way for you to get your system up and running. And it just was sort of perfect timing to engage with that. And that's where we decided to start to work. So when you're designing these highly technical, highly complex systems, and one thing, just to be clear, we actually have had 2 iterations of this. So I did not start with this principle, and I'm going to rename it to start always with the idea that you need to be elegantly simple. You need to build these things simple and seamless so that when someone comes to use them, anyone can pick them up and understand how to use that technology. Once they have the survey available and the map available, it's pretty clear what needs to be done. And it's pretty easy for just about anybody in your operation to access that information at a moment's notice. Start with that, and that will be a good guiding philosophy along the way. And we have found we did not start that way, and I'm hoping that part of this discussion can lead folks on the webinar to not have to go down the roads, the many roads that we went down in trying to develop that. You know, one of the most important things before you ever start development on a database or a survey is to really understand the workflow that you're dealing with at a very deep level. How are folks collecting the data? What specific data is being collected? What are the reports that need to come out of this data? Who needs to see the data at what point, and how do they need to see it? And you're not going to get everything out of that process, but you will get a lot of it, and it will help to start your development on the database structure and the surveys that go with the database. I would argue that you should really be developing these on a parallel path because they tend to inform each other. We found that as we developed these more complex surveys and survey 1, 2, 3 for the northern spotted owls, that we were changing the database at the same time. And as we developed the database, it was feeding into the surveys. So those really start to inform each other. And of course, every chance you can, stand that thing up and get it out to the woods in an offline mode so you can get feedback on what's working, what's not. You can make sure the data is able to successfully sync to your centralized database and you're able to see it. That is a bridge and a barrier that you need to jump over relatively quickly and get confident about, and get your field staff confident that it's going to work. Finally, you need to understand when you're transitioning from a project to a maintenance, which is a really positive step. It means you've kind of jumped the breach, and now you're in a place where you're just trying to maintain. So what do these look like? We decided in our second iteration that one of the first steps we needed to do was to build a really beautiful map, an elegant and simple map that could be used by our field staff to locate their surveys. So for spotted owls, there are really 2 different types of surveys. There is a nighttime survey where you go to, let's see if I can make my mouse work. You go to these red highlighted stations. A surveyor will navigate to one of these red highlighted stations, and they will stand there for 10 minutes and hoot for spotted owls. We have 12 to 20 people out a night doing this, so there's a lot of data that's collected. They can call anywhere from 8 to 20 survey stations in a single evening, so we're collecting a lot of data, and we want to make sure they have an easy way to navigate to their stations. Further, on our second review, we learned that, hey, we can use these wonderful pop-ups, so we're able to have them click on this station, and then they can click on the link here and go right to their survey. And it will auto-fill the station ID. Most of that survey form is automatically filled out for them. They don't need to change almost anything. All they need to do is say when they're done, if nothing happens. We have subforms if there are detections. And then we have a daytime survey where they go out to try and find that spotted owl during the day. And they would click on the location of that spotted owl and it would automatically fill that form. So our goal here is to make it as easy as possible and as simple as possible for our data collectors to grab that data and send it back. And then once they get back into any type of self-service or data service, they are able to send that data back, to sync that data to our centralized database, at which point it is 100% available to our internal folks who need it. So very cool, and I think that we made a lot of really great revisions to this as a result of working with the Esri experts on how to build these things. And finally, here's a data view that we use relatively often, and we're going to end up slicing this even further, I think, for different folks in our organization, but it's where we are now. On the left-hand side here, you can see a specific THP. A forest manager can go in and say, okay, I want to look at Miller Ridge, and I can see it's been called twice. Hey, you know, I know it needs to be called at least 6 times before we can begin operations. Owl folks, I need you to spend a little more time on that one. I need you to prioritize that one. They're able to have that quick look into the data to see what's going on. For our experts, for our executives, they're able to see this is a number, the number of surveys that have been done is a big, important number for them. And for me, a big, important number is what happened yesterday. Did all of our data make it back to the central database? And so we're able to serve all those needs with this data view, with this dashboard that we've built. And this is one of those things that we're going to continue to tweak along the way. As I think Audrey mentioned, that different people kind of need different views into the data. But how does it really look when you build these things? And I mentioned this earlier. I stole this from a habitat conservation planning guideline. The reality here is it's very exciting when you start on these projects. It's really neat. You need to prepare yourself for the trough of working. You can see before I started this, I had much longer hair and I pulled it all out in an attempt to get this done. But now we are in smooth sailing mode and we are in implementation, which is quite exciting. So what does this look like for the rest of our build for this particular element? We are going to build an all-inclusive enterprise system that deals with all of our geospatial data, ties it all together, so at any one time, someone could go in and say, well, where are we at on harvest planning? How much volume do we have approved right now? How much of it has been surveyed for spotted owls? How much of it has botany completed? And we'll have it all in one single place where they can go grab that information. But I also want to recommend, excuse me, and Scott's going to talk more about this, that you build some simple applications and things that are easy to get user buy-in, that get people excited about what you're doing. One for us was an application that allowed us to quickly let people record property corners they've located and send them back to our central database. So we now have a feature working on everybody's data, and that allows us to refine our property boundaries. And that's a big deal for us because it's something we've not been able to easily do. Now we have the technology to do that. So I just want to sum up our lessons learned here. I think the biggest things that I would recommend for anybody working on these things is, first, you got to jump into that ring and you got to not be afraid. You got to be willing to iterate and know it's going to take several rounds to get to where you want to be at the end. And finally, I think the biggest thing is that when you have a failure, that you never waste it, that you take the time to learn from what happened, debrief with all the folks working on that and see what you can do better next time. We have, through our second iteration, I think, become much better at managing and building these complex data flows, and I expect we will be doing much better every time we go through one of these. So I want to close there just by saying that there are lots of different paths that you can take. The neat thing about this software and these applications is that there are lots of different ways to solve a problem, and it leaves open a lot of creativity and a lot of opportunity for folks to think of different ways to solve problems and encourage folks to be collaborative in their approach. Reach out to folks you know in the industry who can help you, whether it be Esri folks or others. There are lots of folks out there who know what's going on. And with that, I want to turn it over to Scott Newlis, who is absolutely an expert on these applications. So, Scott, over to you.
Thank you, Sarah. Very insightful and informative, and really appreciate you going into some detail of what you guys have done over there. So as Audrey mentioned, the ArcGIS platform includes a suite of mobile apps that can enhance productivity and everyday operations. And what I'm going to do for the next about 15 or 20 minutes is focus on how some of these mobile apps can be configured to support specific field-based workflows. And I'm going to focus on 3 common use cases: infrastructure maintenance, which is what we're going to look at first, environmental compliance, and then harvest planning. So the first workflow here revolves around road infrastructure maintenance and monitoring. Many of your organizations have large networks of private forest roads, and these roads are a vital piece of the timber supply chain, and keeping them in operational condition is really important. Tracking the condition of these roads, the related infrastructure, is all key to understanding where maintenance work needs to occur. The challenge, though, is capturing and documenting observations in an efficient manner that enables maintenance crews to respond to issues more effectively and proactively. So ArcGIS Quick Capture is a data collection app that enables field workers to efficiently capture and record observational-based data. The simple interface allows for rapid at-speed data collection. So for instance, as we're driving along through the forest, we can record observations that we come across very simply and very effectively without taking too much time. So here on the screen, what we're seeing is essentially a lot of big buttons that have been configured to capture specific types of information. So as we're driving along our forest, maybe we come across a road that's washed out and we want to record exactly where that is, or a downed tree. Or in this case, maybe we're performing a culvert assessment and we want to capture the condition that that culvert is in. For some of these questions, we can even configure additional information. So if we want to add a photo or additional comments through a user input, we can certainly do that. So any type of information really can be configured here. In this case, we've just configured kind of 3 groups: bridge assessment, road assessment, and culvert assessment. So we can see here the location of these observations is really just being captured from the device itself. So down here at the bottom, I can see kind of a GPS accuracy, 15 feet. Right now, that's using just the integrated receiver of my device, and I'm using an iPad here, but we can augment that with a high accuracy GNSS receiver. So if you need to get very fine grained, very accurate coordinates, you can certainly pair an external receiver and get that information from that receiver. What we're also seeing is the device here is capturing all of our records, and it just updated there. So we now have all records sent. So any observation that we capture is going to be stored locally on our device for a few seconds, and then it's going to be, if connected, it's going to be automatically synced back up. If we're offline, however, we can still capture all of this information. We'll just store it here locally on our device, and then once we regain connectivity, we'll have that information synced up. So Quick Capture is all about rapid, at-speed data collection, very simply. What we can do is take this information that's collected out in the field and visualize it through something like a configurable dashboard. So in this case, this dashboard has been built so all of that information that's captured out in the field is automatically being streamed in. So we see some of those features I just collected. And using some of the configurable elements of the dashboard, we can see a real easy breakdown of not only how many observations have been recorded, but what the breakdown by observation type, and then individual observations and where they're located here on the map. So what this allows us to do is get the information into the hands of those decision makers, give those decision makers the ability to automatically review this information that's being added from the field. So in this case, I've got a washout that was recorded. I can see exactly when it was captured, any comments that the forester driving through the forest out there wanted to convey, and then in this case, they snapped a quick picture, and I'm able to automatically open that up, do a quick identification, maybe classification of some of the issues, and be able to take some next steps. So this is really all about having that information come back into one centralized repository where it can be reviewed by the correct parties, but also giving those people out in the field the ability to collect that information efficiently and effectively. So what we can do, from the office perspective, is take this information that's coming in, decide what needs to occur, and actually take actionable information. So in this case, I see there's a downed tree along this road that's probably blocking the access points here. I can now maybe use some of our other mobile apps and capabilities to assign an assignment or an activity or a task for someone to go and clean that up and give them the information they need to do their job more effectively. So really using quick capture and dashboards, you can build out a simple but powerful workflow to capture and monitor key information about your infrastructure. Using quick capture, real quick before I move on, I just wanted to focus and review real quick that up. It's designed here in a web application. So this is just using ArcGIS Online. We can go into our web application and create projects. And quick capture, being project-based, allows us to actually maintain or support multiple workflows at once. So if I open up this existing infrastructure maintenance project, we can see kind of the layout of our project. And what I'm going to do if I start building this from scratch is just add the buttons that are going to correspond to the data that I want to capture. So in this case, if I click on a button, we can see that a certain feature layer has been associated with it. And down here, we have all of the fields that are in that feature layer. And so we can essentially choose what information gets captured into which field. In this case, I've got a bunch of device variables, maybe coming from my external high accuracy receiver. So we can capture things like speed, accuracy, latitude, longitude, even things like PDOP and that kind of stuff. But then down here, I've got a variable that allows me to essentially reference a list of values. And so all I've done in this case is build out a group, added a couple buttons, and then configured a button for each of these values that correspond to this, this domain here. And that allows me to essentially capture a feature that corresponds to each of these values depending on whatever button I press. This for any number of layers or any number of buttons that we want to add to our project. We can configure the appearance, so the color, the size, the shape of the actual buttons, even add little images. We can do things like configure additional user input or images to be captured. So it's really a simple process to build out these quick capture layouts. And then I would just save it as a project and then share it out with the appropriate users that can then go out in the field and start to collect information. So the second workflow I want to focus on is one that Sarah just covered in detail, and I want to just give kind of an overview and kind of a end user experience as to what these tools can do for a environmental compliance workflow. So as Sarah mentioned, mapping and data collection are crucial to monitoring sensitive wildlife and preserving habitats. This work often occurs in remote areas with little or no connectivity. And so managing mobile workers and equipping them with the right tools to capture information efficiently can be a major challenge. Using Workforce for ArcGIS, teams can coordinate and manage their work through one centralized platform. Here in the web app, activities can be pre-planned in the office by a supervisor or dispatcher. In this case, assignment types can be configured for specific activities. Here we're looking at a bunch of site visits. And if I click on one of these site visits, we can see some detailed information about this type of activity. So the location, the priority, the due date, who it's been assigned by, what the status is, and any optional notes or attachments that this dispatcher wants to include. At any time, the dispatcher can come in here and edit the information if it needs to change, but in general, this information is all kind of defined when the assignment is created. So if we go back to kind of an overview, what we've got here is essentially an assignment at each of those monitoring stations or observation sites. And we want to be able to track the status of our workers throughout the day as they visit each of those sites. So each of these assignments has a status associated with it, so we can see exactly which ones are still assigned, maybe which ones are in progress, or even which ones have been completed, and where those are located there on the map. Also, we have a workers tab that allows us to track some information about the workers that are actually out in the field. So if we actually had people out there doing the work, we'd actually be able to see their location being pulled from their mobile device, so we can overlay their location in relation to where the work is that needs to be completed. And then we can also track the status. So I can see exactly who's working, maybe who's on break, who's not working. Additionally, I can see each individual, what their title is, what their current workload is as far as assignments, and then we can even tie in contact information if we need to get to them for whatever reason. So out in the field, workers can use the Workforce mobile app to really manage their day. So what I've got here is the Workforce mobile app pulled up, and I've downloaded this to my project. So if I go back to this view real quick, Workforce now works completely offline, so I can come in here and actually download this locally so all of my work can be performed completely offline. Once I'm ready to start, I can open this up, and I see this digital to-do list that represents all of my activities that I have to do for the day. So I can see where I'm at in relation to my activities. I can sort these a bunch of different ways if I wanted to, and I can also change my status. If I click on one of these assignments, I can see all of that detailed information. I can come in here and change the status of my assignment. So if I'm ready to start working, I can signify that. And then down here, using some of our app integration capabilities, we can link out to other Esri mobile apps to do things like navigation, visualization, or even data collection. So in this case, once I've arrived at this location, I'm going to go ahead and open up a map in Explorer to help me visualize what's around. So what we did just there was seamlessly jump into our Explorer application, and we're looking at a lot of the same layers here on the map, but what we have in Explorer are some of our different capabilities. So I can click on this particular location, like Sarah mentioned. I can get some pop-up information about that particular feature. I can see what the location is, when it was established, what recorded species have been seen at that location. But really what I can do is also navigate to that using our compass or our wayfinding tool. So in this case, I parked my truck here in this little clearing area, and I actually need to hike over to where this location is, kind of deep within this unit or within this stand. So before I do that, what I want to do is actually drop a pin at my current location, and this is going to help me get back once I'm ready to return to my vehicle. So I can add this pin to my places. I'll just call this my parked truck, and that's going to save it there in my places. Now I can click on this feature again. We can navigate to it, so it gives me not only a distance but also a direction of where I need to go, and as I move or orient myself, I can see what direction I'm going to be traveling in. So once we get to that location, in this case, very similar to what Sarah has done, we've configured a link that links out to a form that allows us to collect information about our site visit. So by clicking on this link, what this is going to do is open up Survey123. And for those of you that don't know, Survey123 is a form-centric application that can be figured really for any workflow. In this case, we've built a form specifically to capture information for a site visit, but they can really be formed for any particular workflow. In this case, we've passed some information from the map. So we've auto-filled our site name and also things like our visit date and the person actually performing the visit. And within Survey123, we can configure a bunch of different question types depending on the information that needs to be captured. So in this case, I've got a visit type, multiple choice question. I can also capture the current weather conditions using just a text. And then down here, I've got different groups of questions that I've grouped. So we can also fully control the appearance and the layout of the form as well. If I expand this observation details group, I can see a question that wants to know if I observed any species or any animals while I was visiting that site. If I answer yes, then I get a lot of other questions that have been configured to show. So we can also build in kind of logic and relevancy depending on the way you answer specific questions. In this case, maybe I'm capturing a bird. We'll get a list specific to birds. And then we can configure additional questions like age, sex, whether or not they're tagged. And so we can move on throughout the survey. We can have any of these fields auto-populated or designed however you want. Very similar, was a call made? If so, was a response received? Then we get additional information. So we can go about filling out the rest of this form. Optionally, at the bottom, we can capture additional notes or comments. But once we're ready to submit our results, we can click this little check mark here. And if we're online, we can go ahead and sync those results. Or if we're offline, we can save them locally to the device and then sync them back up later once we regain connectivity. So in this case, I'll go ahead and send these results now. Those were submitted successfully. What I'm going to do now is go back into Explorer. And remember, we're still at this location in the forest. Maybe I forgot the path I took, so I need to get back to that truck. I'll just click on that little pin there, and I'll navigate back to it. Since I'm simulating my location, I only have 14 feet, so that makes it really easy. Now, once I'm back in the truck, maybe the last thing I'll do is open up Workforce again and just go ahead and finish out this assignment. What that did was it actually moved that assignment from my to-do list over to my completed list. So that allows me to easily track what I've done for the day, what I still need to do for the day, and also update the symbology on the map here. So that circle moved to a darker green. I can see my other locations that I still need to visit over here. One more thing, since Workforce now works completely offline, I can do all of this disconnected. Maybe I go to a cafe for a quick bite to eat for lunch or something like that, and I want to go ahead and sync the results that I did in the morning. I can click this nifty little sync button, and I've got a couple options. I can sync at a specified interval, or I can go ahead and manually sync. And what that's going to do is it's going to send up all the changes I've made. So this assignment that I've completed, it's going to go ahead and sync that back up so the people in the office can see that information. So back in the office, if I go over to back into our Workforce web app, I can scroll down in the list here and I can see that assignment that I just synced has indeed come through. I can see it update on the map. And now as the dispatcher, I can fully visualize and better monitor what my field crews are doing throughout the day. Not everyone is going to have a seat into Workforce, right? Only a few people might serve as this dispatcher role, but what we can do is configure a dashboard for some of our other stakeholders. Like Sarah mentioned, maybe we have other supervisors or executives that want to see this information, and a dashboard is a really great tool to build that out. So what I've got here, if I go ahead and refresh this, let's take a look. This says 1 right now. If I go ahead and refresh this, we should see that information come through in the field that I just collected, and there it is. So we've got 2 now. And what we're looking at in this particular dashboard is a bunch of information kind of in one common place. So we've got a total number of sites that need to be visited, and this is simply coming from the number of Workforce assignments that we have. I've got a breakdown of which sites haven't been visited, which ones have, and then over here in this list, I've got a historical view of all of the site visits that we've made. And within each of these visits, I can actually drill down to get the actual information that was collected at each site visit. We can configure additional elements like this graph down here, so we can see, for instance, all of the observations made in the month of March and how those were distributed on the map, and then be able to dive into the details over here. So for this workflow, real quick, I know I visited site 195484, so I can go over here into our little drop-down list, select that guy out. That's going to update the rest of the dashboard here. So I see I've got 3 total site visits. I can see 1 was made roughly every month. So I know from a scheduling perspective, the site's being visited at a regular interval. And I can see that observation that was just collected a few minutes ago in Survey 123. I can go ahead and click on that, go to my details tab here, and I can see all of that information that we entered into that form. So this dashboard's a really great way to bring in a bunch of content and be able to monitor and get kind of this real-time view of what's going on out in the field. What we can also do is layer in or overlay our harvest planning data. So all of these kind of red squares here, that represents maybe current or active harvest plans, and we can correlate the information that we're capturing in the field to our planned activities. And if something comes up, we notice there's been a new observation or a location has changed that might impact our planned activities, we can evaluate that and make a decision accordingly. So in summary, real quick, what I've done is actually develop a kind of repeatable solution and a related blog that allows you to go and kind of duplicate this entire workflow that we just looked at. So I believe we'll share out some information on how this can be accessed, but you're more than welcome to go and try this for yourself and develop kind of a very similar workflow that you can even tweak to the needs of your individual organization. So lastly, I'm going to end with harvest planning. So our third and final workflow here, revolves around timber harvest planning, and a big part of harvest planning is deciding when, where, and how to harvest. And this is a complicated process that takes into account many important factors and variables. And really, depending on the harvest method chosen, organizations must determine exactly which trees will be included in a harvest by denoting a harvest boundary. To aid in this determination, foresters need the ability to record detailed information on current forest conditions. So Collector for ArcGIS, which is our map-centric data collection app, is a really good tool that's perfect for this workflow. Foresters can view their current location on a map while they're out in the field so they can see what's around them. So in this case, I'm here in this particular unit. I see my blue dot there on the map. That's my current location. I can go ahead and click this harvest unit boundary, and I can get some detailed pop-up information that helps me better understand where I'm at. And in this case, I've walked around this harvest unit boundary, and I'm gonna make the assumption or the decision that not all of it is ready to be harvested. So I wanna go in here and actually define exactly which areas are ready to be harvested by drawing a polygon or creating a new feature. So that's where Collector is really powerful. That new feature can be collected several different ways. So I can use my current location. We can see up here, I've got a GPS accuracy. Again, this is using just the integrated receiver of my device, but I can pair an external GNSS receiver with this if I need that sub-meter accuracy. And I can use that location to create a point essentially at each location that I go to, and then generate a polygon from there, or draw a polygon here and on the map. And that's what I'm going to do in this case, since I'm not actually out there. So I'm just going to choose to collect here. I've got a harvest plan layer that I'm going to collect a new feature into, and I'm just going to go about drawing that feature. So if I zoom in a little bit more, we can see Collector. We can even snap to vertices of existing features. So I'm going to go ahead and add that point. Let's go up to this corner up here, add that point. And then in this case, we're just going to do about half of this harvest boundary. So I'm going to go ahead and finish that out there. While I'm out here, I'm going to capture some attribute information as well. So these attributes can be configured for whatever information you're going to capture. It's just pulling from the fields of the particular layer that we're looking at. In this case, it's 42 acres. I can see that's the size of the shape that I just drew in. And we can also specify the cut type. It's going to be a planned activity. We're going to use cable logging method, and the terrain is gentle. So once I'm ready to commit these changes, I can go ahead and click submit, and that's going to create a new record in that database. Again, if we're offline, this record will be created. It'll just be sitting locally until we regain connectivity and we can sync those changes. So back in the office, I'm able to open a configurable web app that was built to review the information, sorry about that, that was captured out there in the field. In this case, I've configured a filter that allows me to see only all of my unverified harvest plans. There's the feature that was just collected. I can click on this feature and see all of the attribute information that was collected by that forester in the field, but I see some fields are missing. So what I want to do is go back and fill in the missing information. So I can go ahead and click on this feature, and using some of our out-of-the-box editing widgets, I can actually change the attributes of this underlying feature. So I see unit ID, unit name is missing. I can go ahead and click on the underlying unit to pull out this information. In this case, I'm just going to copy and paste. And I'm also going to associate a plan ID. This might just be an arbitrary number. I can review the information that was captured, and then I can associate, in this case, maybe a planned start date, a planned end date, maybe any volume information I can also add. And in this case, since this is kind of a QA/QC process, we can change this verified status from a no to a yes. Optionally, we can edit any geometry. So if I need to clean up this polygon that was created, maybe snap it to some edges or whatever I need to do, then I can certainly do that. We can go ahead and save this out. And what that's going to do is commit that feature into my harvest planning layer. So if I zoom back in here, we can see that feature right there has now been updated to include all of the other harvest plans, and I can click on it and get all of our attribute information that we just entered. So now whatever next process is in the workflow, we can use this information to move through it. So using a combination of all of these configurable apps and some of the native mobile apps that we showed, field workers can really increase their productivity in common everyday workflows like road maintenance, environmental compliance, and harvest unit planning. These are just a sample of the use cases that these tools could apply to, however. So what I'd like to do is challenge each of you to think how your field workflows could be transformed using some of this mobile technology to share information and collaborate more effectively. Audrey, let's toss it back over to you to wrap things up.
Thank you so much, Scott, for walking through all of those workflows, and thank you, Sarah, as well, for sharing Humboldt's story. As Scott mentioned, our forestry team published a blog post that describes exactly how to configure field apps to get started with these workflows today. The blog post shows how to configure and connect field apps for the planning, understanding, capturing, and monitoring phases using templates. We encourage you to use these templates to build your own field workflows, and we'll send out a link to the blog post in a follow-up email. Now we're going to move on to questions. We will answer as many questions as time permits. Please be sure to enter your question in the GoToMeeting webinar dialog box like you see on the screen. Scott, Sarah, and myself will do our best to answer the questions, but if we don't get to your question now, we will follow up with you later on. So we're getting a lot of excellent questions coming in. The first question is for Scott. Scott, you showed a bunch of different mobile apps. Why would you choose one over another for a workflow?
Good question. So the user or the workflow and the end user experience is really going to drive which app you decide to go with. So of the 3 data collection apps we showed today, Collector is map-centric, Survey123 is form-centric, and Quick Capture is really about rapid observation-based data. So depending on the workflow, you may need something that's a little more detailed or a little more tailored, or you may need something where you can just capture information real quick. So what we've seen is that customers deploy all of these mobile apps, and just depending on what workflow corresponds to each app, they build out the associated information accordingly. And what we've also seen is this ability to integrate these apps, right? So there might be a workflow where you use both Collector and Survey123, for instance. So really, the sky's the limit when it comes to deploying these mobile apps for your workflows.
Excellent, thank you, Scott. I have another question coming in for Sarah. Sarah, we received a question. Our foresters are comfortable with the workflows that they have already. So how did you make this shift with the people that are going out in the field that have their protocols already established?
Great question. Yeah, I'd say the first answer is time and patience. And the second answer is seek out the folks who are more already comfortable with technology and who are excited and interested about this type of technology, and get them on board first. Then start moving your way out into the folks who are comfortable with their previous workflow, and hope that they can get them to see the value in what these folks are doing that are already buying into the technology. So start with the people who are already excited and engaged, and gain their trust and confidence, and then build into the folks who are less willing to make the change. They will come.
Thank you, Sarah. Another question that we have here is, can you share information back and forth with contractors or clients? And Scott, I'm going to give that one to you.
Yeah, absolutely. So all of these mobile apps work off of your centralized portal environment. That could either be in ArcGIS Online, or that could be within Enterprise. So if you have the workers out in the field collecting the data, that information is coming back to that centralized system, and then you can build apps, a few of which we showed today, that allow those external stakeholders, contractors, third-party individuals to see that information. So it really just leverages the underlying sharing and collaboration capabilities of the ArcGIS platform.
Great. Thank you so much, Scott. I have another question for you. Can you talk a little bit about how to enable your workforce to be able to work offline before they start their day in terms of getting all of the content and the maps to them?
Sure. So depending on the workflow, right, you may need to go both online and offline. If you're going offline, there's a lot of great new tools available both in ArcGIS Online and in Enterprise that enable you to do things like create offline areas for your maps. So if you know workers are going to a specific area, you can go ahead and define those areas and create kind of offline tile packages for them to use and open up in something like a collector or an explorer. And then for things like navigation, right, you can create mobile map packages that allow users to navigate completely offline. But really, it's all about setting the data up in a way that enables you to take it offline. So there's a couple of different things you can do on the back end to enable syncing and editing so that when that data is being taken offline and edited by various users out in the field, it all comes back into the same database, the same system, back into that one authoritative layer.
Great, thank you so much, Scott. I have another question for you, Sarah. Can you explain the return on investment that you guys have seen from using these workflows?
Yeah, I mean, we really measure based on our objectives and uptake, right? So our first question is, are people uptaking this technology and utilizing it? So that's step one, and if we're starting to see that, then the second question is, have we achieved our objectives? So in the case of the spotted owls, our objective was to provide the information in a timely fashion and have it up to date for our various stakeholders, have it on demand. And those folks are now able to see that, so we have accomplished our goals. So it's a little bit difficult to monetize a return on investment, but when our executives are happy and getting what they want, we've met the need.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Sarah. So that is the time that we have today. I want to thank you so much for attending this webinar, and I hope that it was useful for you. Our contact information is on this slide. Please feel free to reach out to us. Join our forestry group on LinkedIn as well. Just do a search for Esri Forestry and make the request. And I also have the template for the blog post that we showed, the URL right here on this slide. After this webinar, there's going to be a short survey that will pop up, and we would really appreciate your feedback and suggestions in designing future webinars. Thank you so much for being here, and have a wonderful rest of your day.